Boomer Zoomers, Boomer Zoomers, Boomer Zoomers, Boomer Zoomers. Connecting through Zoom is the way to go. So let's dive right in. It's Boomer Zoomers.
Once again, it's that time to meet and to join our beloved Boomer Zoomers down there in the Charlestown Senior Center. And we welcome Bill Isabella, our regular host. Bill, tell us who is with you today.
Well, to my immediate left is the illustrious former All-Star baseball pitcher, Dean Kosaka. Yes, I see that. Yeah, you made a big, you got some.
Wow, I didn't know about this.
I'm sure I just embarrassed Dean when I said that.
But the only reason I did fairly well was because I was a left-handed pitcher, and back in those days, right-handed hitters never saw left-handed pitchers that much.
So one of those southpaws. I was a lefty hitter, Dean, and I hated southpaws. Even though I hit them pretty well, but I still hated to face them. They gave me agita. All right, who else we got, Bill?
Of course, we have the regular Ken McCord here. We no introduction is necessary with Ken. We all know Ken. Some of us try to read, but that's besides the point, Anyway.
All right, so we got two topics. Oh, go ahead, Ken. Go ahead, Ken. Ken?
I'm trying to say that I'm right-handed, but my brother was left-handed, if that counts for anything.
When you go there, Ken.
All right.
but are you left-brained? That's the question. So anyway, all right.
I'm four-brained.
Okay. All brain, all brain. All right. So we got two topics, Bill. We're going to talk about Title IX and the proposed, saving Title IX, women's sports, parental rights, rights of due process. A lot involved in Title IX. A lot of people may not know about. And then we're going to talk about the illegal immigrants in our country and in our state. Are they going to become somehow, we're going to see them voting on election day? So we'll talk about those two things. I assume, Bill, both of these you've discussed at your prior weekly current events meetings.
Yes, both Dean and Ken are up to speed. So yes, we're all set.
All right, great. All right, let's start with Title IX. Bill, where do you want to start with that?
Well, I'd like to start out with Title IX, just a brief description of it. It prohibits discrimination based on sex and education programs. It is much more broad than just that simple statement, but it uses sex as a determining factor on who gets what. And unfortunately, when the law was written many, many years ago, it was determined back then, and some may disagree, that there are only two sexes, men and women. Well, today that law is being used to abridge the transgender population, which I think is a little bit of a mistake. And quite frankly, I think as it relates to the Constitution, I think we have to keep that in mind too, that there are the two sexes, and that's exactly what Title IX is about. It's about sex discrimination, it's about discrimination based on sex, man and woman, not anything else. But I think people are prostituting our Constitution once again and using Title IX to achieve funding for transgender sports or transgenders in sports and so forth. And regarding the second topic about illegal immigrants,
we'll get to that one in a second. Let's hold off on the second topic. Let's go around on this one first. Dean, Dean, a lot of times federal funding and Title IX is there. I mean, the government can't tell private entities what to do per se. But they do fund a lot of colleges, a lot of political groups, and they can impose through what we call strings, mandates attached to federal funding. They can either threaten to remove the funding or mandate that you follow certain agendas. You would like to see federal funding just clean, but instead it comes with all these mandates and strings attached. Now they're using Title IX as a way to force institutions that receive federal funding to comply to its cultural agenda, including the transgender agenda, which many of us don't agree with. What do you think about all this, Dean?
Well, I don't think it's really fair that the government is sticking its nose once again into sports or anything actually of that nature, which is mostly a cultural issue. And if it's a cultural issue, I think the people should be the ones that should decide, not the government. And I feel that that's just out of bounds. Their government's encroaching too much on every aspect of our lives. And I think that's one of those things.
Ken, he makes a great point there, Dean, that, even if it's not a clean federal funding without mandates, the one area they certainly shouldn't be getting involved in is cultural issues, because there's we're a melting pot. There's so many different cultures. There's so many belief systems by so many different, ethnic groups in this state. In this state, in this country. Boy, I think Dean is right. What do you think, Ken? The cultural issues is not a place the government should be seeking to impose its will.
Well, for the 2024 Olympics, which will be held in Japan, they announced that they were going to have women's sports and men's sports, not a third level in there. I think that would be the solution. Let's have a separate transgender Olympics, that we could have East Coast teams, West Coast teams. They can have all-star games like we have with baseball, and they can even invent their own games like hopscotch and jump rope.
Ken, I'm going to disagree with you there, because having a transgender Olympics means you acknowledge the fact that people can become transgender. I don't believe they can. I believe a woman is a woman, a man is a man, no matter how you dress, no matter what hormones or surgeries you take. I don't think we should even acknowledge transgender. People want to dress how they want, be called what they want. That's fine. But I don't like acknowledging something that I believe goes against my firm religious beliefs and all. And this is the basis of my complaint for all this. So there was a woman who made the news in Rhode Island, Bill. She owns a gym, a kickboxing gym or something. And she said, well, I'm going to have men's classes, I'm going to have women's classes, and I'm going to have transgender classes. That's kind of to Ken's point. What did your group think about all this, Bill?
Well, I tell you, the transgender issue, I think is something that's going to go away eventually. I think most people, most sane people, most clear thinkers are not going to acknowledge the fact that there are more than two sexes. So you choose which one you want to do, and that's where you can go. But what concerns me more is what our government is trying to do. Here we have the Department of Education in June of 22, they released for public comment a proposal that will identify sexual orientation and gender identity in Title IX. Now, Title IX was developed in 1972, when a time where transgenderism wasn't even being thought of. Now they're trying to interpret in 2023 what law was enacted in 1972. That's a misrepresentation. I further believe that this representation on the part of the Department of Ed is something that's flown under the radar. I think if you ask 99 out of 100 people, they've never heard of this. But it is something that our Department of Education, which is not constitutionally guaranteed, suddenly is taking over Title IX on top of everything else.
Yep. Yeah. And Dean, to amplify Bill's thoughts, Title IX was enormously successful in bringing some parity with men's and women's sports. Right. Now they want to change Title IX, I believe, as do many others, in a way that will destroy women's sports by allowing men to dominate women's sports. What do you think of the fairness issue when it comes to women's sports and the changes that Title IX would bring to all that?
Well, if that's the direction they're heading, why not just do away with any genderisms and just have one open sport and say the best person wins?
Well, there you go. That's an idea. But that would in essence eliminate women's sports, right?
Essentially,
then you're back to how it was. What
pre-72?
Pre-72. So then you start over again.
I mean, offering funding in the pot of tax money, and that's basically what we're talking about. Using tax money to fund both, I think, is still a good idea, because there are some very good women athletes and there are some very good women's sports. And I think a woman should be able to compete on a level field with her own gender. But this nonsense about suddenly allowing men to compete is just very wrong. But that's the whole point. This Department of Education, a non-guaranteed federal department, not guaranteed by the Constitution, guaranteed by nothing, suddenly is usurping the law that was passed legitimately back in 72. That bothers me greatly.
Ken, I'd like you to make the final comment on this about this topic. There's another part of Title IX that deals with parental rights, that deals with due process rights. We all remember the famous Duke lacrosse supposed rape case. Anytime a student is accused of sexual misconduct or assault, they want to change Title IX so that the accused really doesn't have due process. That they are pretty much guilty until proven innocent, which is the exact opposite of our history of jurisprudence in this country. Do you have any thoughts on the due process parts that the Biden administration wants to put largely in favor of the accuser in their Title IX proposed reforms?
I think we're running a philosophical not really a debate, but a forcing of wills on people that are more in line with this equity situation. It's not equality. It starts with the same couple of letters, but it's not the same. And that we're running the risk of creating, at best, mediocrity. You mentioned the fact of having the best of the best in terms of our competitions. Not if you're going to have an equity base to determine, well, who's better than somebody else.
Yep. Agreed. All right, Bill, topic number 2.
Yep.
What did you guys talk about when it came to illegal immigrants and voting?
Well, we're allowing massive amounts of illegal immigration to occur in this country. Some say 10 million, some say 15. We just don't know. But the fact of the matter is some states are allowing some of these folks who gain identification cards, namely driver's licenses. What concerns me is that the Constitution in Article 1, Section 4 guarantees state legislatures to judge how their elections are to be held and adjudicated. Now, that being said, you're going to get a progressive state, pick one, California, pick one, who might say, well, if you have a driver's license, you can vote. In the state of Rhode Island, if you're not a registered voter, but you show up to vote on the day of voting, as long as you show identification, you can get a provisional ballot, which means you can't vote for local people, but you can vote for national. Is this a way that the progressives are going to stack the deck, so to speak, and get these illegal immigrants to vote Democratic at the next election? I think it could be.
Dean, great point. Dean, I don't even know what they call them. The identification cards they're now giving out to illegal immigrants or undocumented, whatever residents, whatever you want to call them, is identical. It looks absolutely identical to a U.S. citizen's Rhode Island resident's driver's license. So if you show up at the poll, like Bill just said, you're going to probably at least be allowed to cast a provisional ballot, if not an actual ballot.
Right.
Do you feel there are adequate safeguards in place to guard against somebody looking to abuse the system?
I don't believe so. I think that's one of the weak points we have here in Rhode Island, and it needs to be addressed, no doubt.
Rhode Island is just one of many states that's now giving ID cards. Ken, do you believe this all ties into the open border, the mass immigration, the open door policy we're seeing by the Biden administration at our southern border, that to Bill's point, the more, quote, undocumented residents there are in this state, the more voter ID cards are given out, the more we might get potentially left-leaning votes in our local and national election. Do you ascribe to that theory, Ken?
Yes, I think that is the sole reason that we have these open borders and these flights all over the United States coming up from Florida and Texas, is to get a vote base. And I got to tell you something. I don't want some foreign country people coming in and then winning elections in the local jurisdiction and then telling me as an American citizen how I can or cannot behave or rules to follow. That I don't want to see this country turned into another Venezuela or Cuba or communist China. And that's where a lot of our immigrants are coming from.
Absolutely. And Bill, they're also telling you when they basically allow that vulnerability for an undocumented immigrant to use those ID cards to vote when they shouldn't be, they're also telling you that your vote just got canceled, that you just got disenfranchised. One of the most sacred rights and privileges we have in this country is the one person, one vote, one citizen, one vote. And every time somebody not authorized to vote does cast a vote, you and some other American citizen is being disenfranchised.
Mike, it remains where the opposition to conservative values, you could call it whatever you like, whether it's Title IX or whether it's this topic of voting, it's a constitutional issue. And those on the extreme left, the progressive left, and this is a phrase I use frequently, are prostituting our Constitution. It was never meant to be for this to be done. Quite frankly, I'm very upset with this. I think, quite frankly, if we're not careful, we may be turning over our country and changing the culture of 180, as opposed to it being done through assimilation. It's going to be done through an overnight voting process. I think that's a real
Dean Kosaka, I don't know. I apologize, but by looking at your last name, obviously your family heritage is from a different country. There's a process to come to this country, to emigrate to this country, to be accepted and to become a citizen in this country and have that right to vote. I'm sure your family went through all that in the proper ways, however many decades or centuries ago that was. How does it make you feel that other people are bypassing and abusing that sacred process?
Well, like you say, it basically makes you feel like you're being disenfranchised from the system because, like you say, their vote's going to cancel my vote. And therefore, being an actual American citizen and them not being an American citizen, that really does hurt. And I feel like the history of this country and all the citizens, actual American citizens that came through that process and became American citizens, they're all being disenfranchised.
Yep. All right, Ken, final word to you. We'll let you, with your infinite wisdom, wrap it all up and put a bow on it. Whether it's whether it's changes to Title IX, whether it's this belief that we can issue these ID cards and it'll never lead to a fraudulent vote. Public policy today is now based on completely false narratives, but yet we're enacting major public policies that have severe implications for our democracy. Your thoughts on this whole false narrative problem we have in this country?
Well, something that Bill mentioned earlier, that I believe in states' rights, where the individual state, by the Constitution, can determine its own method of running elections. My problem is that with the last election, they didn't do that good a job, that they changed the rules. They extended the voting. They opened it up to mail-in ballots, that they did not follow their own state constitution, right, how to run the election. They changed the times and everything. So I don't think that we can allow the individual state rights to open this country to literally an invasion.
Great point. I should also add, before we say goodbye, that this year in Rhode Island, if you're under the age of 18, you can vote in a primary at age 17, as long as you're going to be 18 by the time of the general election. That's something new. We won't talk to you about it. I just want to make that as a note to our viewers. Bill Isabella, Dean Kosaka, Ken McCourt. Boy, time flies fast when we're having fun with you guys down there at the Charlestown Senior Center. But thank you, Boomer Zoomers, for joining us here on In the Dugout.
Wish you well, Mike. Thank you.
Very good.
All right, and a happy and blessed New Year to you and all of your current events group out there at the Charleston Senior Center, and a happy New Year to you, our viewers. Thanks for tuning in. For In the Dugout, Mike Stenhouse. See you next game.